Hello again, precious friends. Welcome back to Aunt Patty's Kitchen on the Carnivore Hippie channel. Today we're going to be making a super fun recipe inspired by another content creator that I appreciate. Her name is Indigo Nili. She does carnivore and keto recipes, and her work has been an inspiration to me on many an occasion. I will link her channel below, and she'll also be in my featured channels after today. But first of all, before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about skillets, and you'll see why this becomes important as we go along. But right now, here we have, I want to show you, this is called, technically it's a 12-inch skillet. But what I want you to understand, or what I want you to notice is, when a skillet is listed as a 9-inch skillet or a 10-inch skillet or an 11-inch skillet, it's measured from outside edge to outside edge across the circumference. And I don't know if you can see this. This is, yes, outside edge to outside edge. It is indeed just about 12 inches. But because the edges, the sides of the skillet are so widely flared on this particular example, the actual interior cooking surface, you can measure that by going onto the back, is only about 9 inches across. Okay, so when you have a 12-inch skillet, the diameter of the skillet isn't nearly as important as the interior cooking surface. So this interior cooking surface would be exactly, even though it's a 12-inch skillet, would be exactly the same as a 9-inch skillet that did not have sloped sides. For instance, let me show you this one. This skillet has straight sides. So even though it is technically only, it's an 8.5-inch skillet, but the cooking surface is just a little bit over 7 inches. So even though this is a way smaller skillet, the cooking surface on this is almost as big as the cooking surface on here. So I just wanted you to be aware when you're looking at skillets, or when someone says a 12-inch skillet or a 10-inch skillet, you have to be aware, is it a flared side skillet or is it a straight-sided skillet? Because that's going to make a big difference in the cooking surface. You're interested in the cooking surface. Now, the reason I go into this is because with the recipe we're going to make today, we're going to be pouring a layer of batter into the bottom of this skillet, and we want to have the right volume of batter to go into the base of the skillet. And for this particular skillet, we're going to be using 1/3 cup of batter, and you'll see why that's important in a little bit. So for this recipe, the cooking surface of the skillet for 1/3 cup of batter is about 9 inches, maybe a tiny bit less. Okay? So if you have a skillet and you want to make this recipe, measure the cooking surface of the skillet, not the standard measurement of the skillet, which is here. Okay? So this is going to be the same as, this is a 9-inch cooking surface. Right? That's important, and you'll see why in a minute. So we're going to start off with our hardware, which is going to be a skillet with a 9-inch cooking surface and a stick blender with an appropriate mixing vessel, or you can use a jar blender. I haven't made this in a food processor, but the batter is very liquid for what we're going to do. So I'm thinking that a blender is going to be much more efficient. We're also going to need a whisk. Okay. And for the end, we're going to need a slicing knife And we are going to need a pastry brush for greasing our pan when we're ready to cook. And so what's the recipe? The recipe is inspired by Indigo Nili's carnivore noodles that I'm going to start calling Carnoodles because I just like the word and because I think it's really useful. They are a noodle substitute or a pasta substitute, completely carnivore. They are basically eggs, gelatin, and pretty much, and water, and with a little bit of butter to grease the skillet. And we're going to get started. These noodles are so versatile. This recipe is so versatile. It can be used to make, as I said, noodle substitute. It can be used to make lasagna sheets, to even make things like, crackers. So, which we'll be getting into in further videos. It's just such a useful and versatile batter. I think once you get the hang of it, you'll love it. So here we go. Here's our wetware. We're going to have 1 whole egg. That's 5 tablespoons of egg white powder, excuse me. I just have to tell you, I've been having terrible hay fever and I took some antihistamine and I'm feeling much better, but I'm just not quite as here as I would ordinarily be because of the side effects of the antihistamine, so please bear with me. Anyway, back to our wetware. Some melted ghee for greasing our pan. This is 3/4 of a cup of water, cold water, and 2 tablespoons of unflavored gelatin. Collagen powder won't work, my understanding. I've never tried it with collagen powder, but my understanding is collagen powder will not work. Any kind of regular plain unflavored gelatin will work. If you're using the little packets, this is 2 packets. If you're measuring it out of a big jar, it's 2 tablespoons, or you could weigh it out as 30 grams. Okay, so let's get started for what we're going to do. This is very easily mixed up in the blender. We're going to put our whole egg in the blender cup. And I'm just going to get that started a little bit. And I'm going to put about 1/4 of a cup of water in there, of the water, just to make sure there's enough volume so that the motor can actually engage the egg. Okay, that's good. Now, we're going to take this out just for the moment. And we're going to add our water, our gelatin powder, and our egg white powder. And just because we need the egg white powder to be wet before we put the blender in it, we're going to stick this little whisk in and we're just going to whisk it around until all the egg white powder has been wetted. It's going to be lumpy, but that's okay. Please do not put the blender in on top of the wet egg white powder. You will be very, very sorry. You will have a very dangerous choking cloud of egg white powder if you do that. Please don't inhale egg white powder. It's very bad. So we're gonna just blend this up until it's completely blended and smooth. It won't take very long. Scrape down the sides a little bit. Okay, there we go. That is done. The batter right now is very thin and kind of watery. It's about the consistency of a melted milkshake. It's going to thicken up some though as we go along. As the gelatin hydrates. So I'm going to pour this now from the blender cup into a container that is easy to pour from. And give me a moment while I put these things to soak. When you're working with this batter, you really don't want it to sit and dry on anything because it will get very, very difficult to clean up. Now, next, we are going to start our cooking vessel. Mr. Cooktop is going to be on power level of 600, and it's going to be on temperature of 320. I like cooking this on a slower temperature because I find it's easier if the pan is not too hot to get an even coating of the batter on the pan. This is very much like crepe batter. And we're just going to give that a minute to heat up. Since it's an induction cooktop, it goes pretty quick. Just going to smear some ghee on there. You can use any kind of cooking fat you want. I don't recommend whole butter because it'll probably burn. But this batter is pretty darn sticky because of the gelatin. And you will need to lubricate your pan even though it's going to be a nonstick pan because this batter will actually stick to a nonstick pan. Excuse me, I'm going to adjust my lighting here while I wait for my pan to heat up. Oh, it smells like it's almost there. There we go. Now, here is our batter. It's pretty foamy, but that's okay. You can get away with it. I just stir it just to make sure that we split the bubbles up evenly between all the... You can see it's even, it's thickened up now. It's about the thickness of crepe batter. You could skim the bubbles off if you wanted to go through that. I'm just stirring it up just to make sure the bubbles get evenly distributed and we don't have just half the crepes being all bubbly. So they'll all be just a little bit bubbly. So now we're going to pour right into the middle and we're just going to swirl slowly. Shake a little bit. Yes, and miss your cooktop bitches when I lift the pan off the cooktop because it's an induction top. Now we're going to let this cook just until the edges of the sort of crepe become dry and start to lift away from the edges of the pan. And then we're going to turn it over and let it cook on the other side. But I think it's important to say that you don't want to try and turn it too quickly because if you do that and the top is not set enough yet and it sticks to itself, it's going to be a mess and you won't be able to save it. So wait until the edges have actually well started to peel away all around it. See, you can see right here it started to lift up. This is why you need a nonstick pan for this. I like to go through and just loosen it. And there we go. You can, I don't know if you can see, it's a tiny, tiny bit brown there, but that's okay. You can make it as brown as you want to, but they need to be completely cooked through. I like to cook them a little bit longer than Indigo Nili does because I like them a little bit drier. And I'm going to get me a rack to set over here. Now, after it has cooked on the bottom side, I like to turn it over again. It'll sizzle once again. I like them to dry out a little bit because I like the texture better when they're a little drier and a little bit less tender. And also, I think when you reheat them and get them ready to put in some kind of a dish, I think you're better off. They have a better texture if they are a little drier. Okay, so it stopped sizzling, and there we go. I'm going to lift this off the cooktop, and the cooktop is going to gripe at me because it doesn't like to have the pan lifted off. We're going to lubricate the pan again. And we're going to add another 1/3 of a cup of our batter to our pan. Just shake and swirl until it all is coated. Now, I've seen people make this and they make sure the pan is pretty dang hot, and the oil is sometimes smoking when they oil it, and they swirl the batter around really fast. I have better luck doing it slower on lower heat. I get a more uniform product. So that's how I do it. But you'll probably have to experiment yourself. The edges are starting to peel back. Just loosen. Oh, I tore it a little bit. That's okay. These are really thin. You can use them for crepes. And, oop, you don't want that to fold over on itself. There we go. If it falls with a little wrinkle like this, just give it a second and it'll loosen up and you can flatten it out. These do take a little practice. So I would encourage you. You can use a smaller skillet with a smaller volume of batter as to practice with, and it's a little bit easier. Okay, now I'm gonna again turn it back over. You can hear the sizzle. I'm just gonna wait for it to stop sizzling. Takes about 20 or 30 seconds. These things are so great. You can eat them as crepes. You can use them if you're going to eat them as crepes. I would not flip them the second time. I would just take them right out of the pan after the first flip, and eat them as soft set as you can manage it. But for the noodles, I like to dry them out a little bit. Okay, now I'm just going to dump that out onto now this is getting a little bit low for me to be dipping, so I'm going to pour one recipe on this size pan makes about 5 crepes. You'll see there's a couple of little thin spots. If you really, if you have like a little hole in it or something, you can add a little bit extra on top of it, but I find out it doesn't really make that much difference. Add a little extra if you want to on the thin spots, but I don't think it makes that much difference. So again, you're going to want your pan to be on medium to medium-low heat. You don't want it to be too hot. You don't want these to cook too fast. Don't start trying to loosen them until the edges have begun to curl back. And like I said, if you don't get a clean flip the first time, just give it a second. It'll loosen up and then you can straighten it out. I've made like 6 batches of these so far with various and sundry ratios of egg white powder and eggs. You can make these with just whole eggs if you want to. You can make these with 4 whole eggs with more egg yolks. They still work just fine. I like them with the firmer texture that the extra egg white gives them. But I like the egg white powder, and I've been looking for more things to do with it, and I think this is great. You can do this all with egg white powder as well. You can do 6 tablespoons of egg white powder, or 8 tablespoons rather. You can do 8 tablespoons of egg white powder and a cup of water along with the gelatin, and this will work. It'll make very, very pale noodles. They'll be very neutral flavored, but you can do that, and you can make like egg-like wraps with them that way. So if you have egg white powder, but you don't have whole eggs, or if you just want to use up some egg white powder, you can do that. Yes, Mr. Cooktop doesn't like it when I lift the pan off, but it's just going to have to live. We're going to get 4 of these. Whoops. Don't forget to butter. Like I said, if you just get any little holes, just go ahead and pour a little bit extra. There, we got 4 of them. Sometimes you get 5, depending on the size of your pan and the size of your cup measure. If you used a smaller skillet, of course you'd get more crepes. I'm going to make some smaller ones for you, and we're going to use them to make taco shells, because these things are actually awesome fried. And we'll do that another video. Here we go, we're getting there. It's starting to turn back, so I can start loosening. And flip. So once this is done, I'm going to show you how I like to cut them into noodles. You can cut them thick or thin. I'm going to show you how to cut one of them the thick way, and I'm going to show you how to cut the rest of them the thin way. And we're going to flip over one more time. Wait for it to stop sizzling. This is just eggs and gelatin. Amazing. Okay, that has stopped sizzling, and we're gonna take that off and let it cool. Now, you'll have to let these cool for a little bit before we can slice them. But the first ones have already become cool, so I'll wait for this one to cool and I'll show you how to cut them up the fat way. So these are flexible. They're sturdy. I don't know if you can see that. They're sturdy. You can use them as sandwich wraps. Like I said, you can use them as crepes, but I would cook them more tender if you were going to use them as crepes. But these we're going to cut into like a fettuccine or a thin fettuccine type noodle, or more like an Asian lo mein noodle, because that's what I'm going to do. I don't like to stack them. Ostensibly, you could stack them as many high as you liked and then cut them, but I don't like to stack them more than 2 high, just because I find it difficult to manage. So here's our slicing knife. Okay, I want you to notice how I'm slicing them. Roll them up relatively tight, and when you go to slice them, do not just mash down. You want to use a sawing motion, but you don't want to saw back and forth and back and forth. You're going to go 1 motion forward and 1 motion back for each slice. So we're going to start here. We're going to go forward and then back. Or alternatively, you start with the back of the knife and rest it on the roll. You don't want to use force, downward force. You want to use the weight of the knife to do the work for you. Draw the knife back, and at the same time angle the point of the knife down so that it contacts the board, and then draw back. This is how you get the finest slice. Okay? Use the back of the knife, rest it on the roll, using the weight of the knife, a very slight downward pressure. Draw the knife backwards, and at the same time angle the knife point down. Keep the knife point in contact with the board and draw back. Knife skills are one of the best things you can learn. You see, once you get used to the motion, you can cut them pretty swiftly and they stay nicely shaped. Again, the alternate motion is to push forward just a little bit, contact the point of the knife, and then draw back. Push forward a little bit and then draw back. But I like this way best. And you can, with a little practice, you can make these really thin, almost as thin as spaghetti. Whoops. And yeah, some of them will break apart, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. As my mom used to say, it's all going down the same hole. There you go. There is your thin noodles. These make great, what I call fake lo mein, like Chinese noodles. And I'm going to do a recipe for you for there. And now for the wide noodles, I like to trim the edges off here, right here, and then cut this into thirds, stack it up. Doesn't matter if it's all even or not. And then just slice across to make your fat noodles. There you go. So, there we have it, my friends. Carny noodles, or Carnoodles, as I've called them. I love them. I have made a sort of an imitation lo mein Chinese food out of them with soy sauce and oyster sauce that was delicious. I have fried them sort of like croutons until they were crisp, which we will go into in a future video. You can put them in soup. You can, I have heated them up in a pan with a little butter and just put some cheese and black pepper to make a cacio e pepe, sort of a substitute. That was also delicious. My hubby loved that one. So please try these. Do some experiments. I'm going to be back with some proper recipes to use these, including some beef stroganoff using these lovely, lovely noodles. It's going to be awesome. But for now, this video has been long enough, and I hope you will try this. I wish you peace, love, and meat, and we will talk again soon. Bye.